This recently released film, with a small budget and an unknown cast of actors, tells a remarkable true story set during Hitler's rise to power in Germany. Hello, and welcome back to another installment of Film Friday, in which I review a new film every single week. This week we're looking at the 2024 film entitled Bonhoeffer, directed by Todd Carmanicki and starring Jonas Dassler. Let's get into it. The story follows the life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Lutheran pastor living in Germany when the Nazi Party begins to overtake that country. Initially, he speaks out against Hitler and his Nazification of the German Lutheran Party, before eventually involving himself with an assassination plot to kill the Führer. Eventually, he was imprisoned by the Germans and executed in April of 1945. Now, there was a good deal to like about this film, but besides the fact that the story upon which this is based is an incredible one, I did find that the manner in which the story was told was one of the weakest parts of the film. Now, that is a bit of a surprise, given that the film was not only directed, but also written by Todd Carmanicki, who wrote the screenplay for Clint Eastwood's Sully. As I mentioned in my review for Sully, I thought that the story writing of that film was one of its strongest parts, especially the way in which they alternated between the plane crash and the events of the present moment in a way that was compelling and easy to follow. In Bonhoeffer, Carmanicki employed an almost identical technique, alternating between the story of Bonhoeffer's life from his birth to his death with his imprisonment a few days before his execution, with the latter timeline catching up to the former as the film drew to a close. However, the difference here is that there were not simply two general moments in time between which the story alternated. The timeline covering the story of Bonhoeffer's life stretched over a vast period of time, and it was the jumps between these that actually left the viewer confused. Certainly, it goes without saying that a 2.5-hour long biopic is not going to be able to touch upon every single important moment in a figure's life. But in this case, there were certain holes in the timeline of the story which needed to be filled in order for a viewer, such as myself, who knew almost nothing about Bonhoeffer, to be able to follow along. And I don't think these holes needed to be left empty. They certainly didn't for the sake of runtime, because there was a good deal of unnecessary exposition. So some events were over-discussed and over-explained, while other key moments and other key aspects and context to the story were just left out entirely. Such as the fact that Bonhoeffer became a pastor before speaking out against the Nazi Party, an omission which left me very confused when he just took the pulpit one random Sunday. It seemed as if the filmmakers assumed we knew more about Bonhoeffer than we did about the basic events of World War II. I also found that this project came across as a bit more preachy than it needed to. Certainly that comes with the territory. Bonhoeffer was a preacher, after all, but some of it was just sort of thrown in there without having too much bearing on the plot. I thought one of the strengths of another Angel Studios project, Sound of Freedom, lay in the fact that it was able to show us that Agent Ballard was driven by his faith without feeling the need to constantly remind us of that fact. So it was a bit disappointing to see that Bonhoeffer was unable to achieve that also. But just as with Sound of Freedom, we saw the story of a man who was driven by his faith to stand up in the face of evil, even when it could, and in this case it did, cost him everything of earthly value. And so, despite some critical flaws in the plot of this film, Bonhoeffer was really well done in some other aspects. For instance, the music and cinematography went a long way towards capturing the mood of the scenes. Furthermore, the character of Bonhoeffer was interesting enough that you were inclined to continue watching, even if it meant fighting and struggling to understand the unnecessarily confusing plot lines. So overall, this is a film which I would recommend watching, even if I would only give it a 7 out of 10. With that being said, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to comment your own thoughts on this film below, and don't forget to subscribe for more movie commentary and reviews.